Welcome to Best and Worst, a series in which we deep dive into the best and worst albums of a band's career. As you can tell, this episode is about Kiss. So how do we define best and worst? This is not my personal opinion. This video is through the lens of success and impact. What was a band's most successful album, and what was their most damaging? And with Kiss, the most definitive album is Alive. Kiss was formed in 1973 with an original lineup consisting of Gene Simmons on bass, Paul Stanley on rhythm guitar, Peter Criss on drums, and Ace Frehley on lead guitar. Their first album was released in February 1974 to timid sales and no successful singles. Over the next year, Kiss released 2 more albums to a similar lack of success. However, they quickly made a name for themselves as a live act. With their kabuki theater makeup and over-the-top stage effects that included breathing fire and levitating drums, Kiss became a notable and exciting live act like few others. But Kiss couldn't live and survive off that alone. Manager Bill Aucoin maxed out credit cards just trying to keep the band on tour. They needed record sales and to get on the radio. Kiss was the first act signed to Casablanca Records, a then new company run by Neil Bogart. And by 1975, things were not looking good for the label. They released a compilation of Johnny Carson highlights that disastrously flopped and left them in dire straits financially. And with Kiss not only not making any money, but costing a lot of money, Casablanca was on the verge of bankruptcy. There was no money to make a 4th Kiss studio album at the time. And since the live shows were going well, they came up with the idea of recording a live album as a Hail Mary. And it is a Hail Mary. Putting out what is ostensibly a greatest hits album for a 2-year-old band with literally 0 hits is a crazy move, but it's really the only move they had. Gene Simmons has said that live albums especially were a death sentence, that they simply weren't done. He's exaggerating, as he often does, but Alive is a landmark in a band having such a big success with one. To record the live shows and produce the album, they brought in Eddie Kramer. He had produced Kiss's original demo that got them their record deal at Casablanca, but when it came time to actually record the albums, Bogart chose to hire in-house producers and then ultimately himself. Kramer took the gig because he found it exciting and challenging. Translating the energy and choreographed chaos of a Kiss concert to vinyl was not an easy task. The band recorded 4 shows on their Dress to Kill tour in 1975, Detroit, Michigan on May 16th, Cleveland, Ohio on June 21st, Davenport, Iowa on July 20th, and Wildwood, New Jersey on July 23rd. The band would then go into Electric Lady Studios in New York with Kramer to perform overdubs. Now this is a point of contention for some. There are people who feel that a live album should be live with no editing, exactly what happened on stage. And I think that kind of live album is rare. All live albums are going to feature some level of editing. The reasoning is simply that mistakes happen. They're unavoidable. And particularly with Kiss, the way that Gene and Paul run around on stage, of course they're going to hit some bum notes. And Kiss's point of view was that they'd rather have a good album than 100% authenticity. And I think it's a fair point of view. It's not like they went into the studio and re-recorded the songs from scratch. They didn't have the money to do that anyway. They punched up moments that needed to be punched up. If the results are great, who cares? Other changes done after the shows involved the crowd and the pyro effects. Both sounded unimpressive in the recordings, so they were beefed up to be more immersive. Alive was released on September 10th, 1975 and was an instant smash. It peaked at number 9 on the Billboard charts and stayed on the charts for 110 weeks. That's a little over 2 years. The album's actual sales number is a little more nebulous. It was certified gold in December 1975, which means it sold 500,000 copies. But it's never been recertified for some strange reason. I've seen quadruple platinum thrown around as the number quite a bit, which would mean 4 million. In doing research for this, I saw the number listed at 9 million copies sold, but I can't find a source on that, just people saying the number. Regardless, it sold a lot of copies. It also gave Kiss their first hit single in the live version of Rock and Roll All Night. That song had been written and recorded for Dress to Kill in early 1975 and released as a single, but it didn't amount to much. However, the live version resonated with people and it peaked at number 12 on the Billboard charts, Kiss's first top 20 hit. I think Alive's success can be attributed to 3 things. For one, the album is just really good. It's their best material from their first 3 albums, but with much needed energy and sonic power. It kicks ass and is exciting to listen to just as an awesome rock and roll record. It's quintessential. The other two reasons are related to each other, which are word of mouth and FOMO. As Ted Nugent put it in the VH1 Ultimate Albums episode on Kiss Alive, if a guy sees Kiss in concert and then tells 20 of his friends about it, they'll want to experience that in some way and, oh hey, here's a live album from them. In today's world, if you hear about a band, there are tons of ways you can check them out yourself without seeing them in concert. For example, I've talked about this new band Plush on the channel before. They're really cool, and they very recently released a live album. And while I enjoyed it, and I think it's really good, there's not really a need for it. If I want to know what Plush is like live, I can find tons of YouTube footage of them playing. But 1975 was a different world. If you wanted to know what Kiss was like, you had to see them. Alive created a way for people to experience a Kiss concert anytime they wanted, and for people who had seen them to relive that experience. It's genius in retrospect, and not really something that can be replicated. Alive is a rock and roll classic and put Kiss on the map. Without it, the band would not exist today. It's an incredible achievement and set the bar for live albums. So that's their best. But what about the worst? We'll get into it right after a quick word from our sponsors. Stick around. Hey guys, the wonderful people at Lekato were kind enough to send me a guitar practice amp. It's called the GA-02. It's a simple 2-channel amp that you can charge with the USB-C cable. Comes in 2 colors and is a lot of fun to practice with, especially with its Bluetooth feature. You can connect your phone and play along with your favorite songs. And even if you're not a guitar player, it makes a very cool Bluetooth speaker. Check them out. Now back to the show. Following the success of Alive, Kiss knew something needed to change in the way they approached their studio albums. That change came in the form of producer Bob Ezrin and pushed the band beyond their limits to make what I think is an absolute masterpiece, Destroyer. So it makes sense that Kiss's next collaboration with Ezrin would also be amazing, right? Right? By the beginning of the 80s, Kiss was not in a great place. Peter Criss had been fired and replaced by Eric Carr, and while their 1980 album Unmasked did well in Europe and Australia, it underperformed in the States, putting Kiss at a bit of a crossroads. Kiss lightened up their sound with 1979's Dynasty in an attempt to score a big hit single, and they accomplished just that with I Was Made for Lovin' You. They fully embraced this combo of disco, pop, and rock for both Dynasty and Unmasked. And while it scored them one of their most popular hits, it also alienated a lot of their fans at the time, and the band knew it. If you watch interviews at the time, you can tell Kiss was fully aware that Unmasked was a mistake, and they needed to change. During the Unmasked tour, they promised a heavier rock record, a return to form. But once the tour was over and the band convened to make this new album, they were lost. They weren't writing anything that they felt was any better than what was on Unmasked. For the record, I love Unmasked, but I get where they're coming from. And then they had a brilliant idea, which was get Bob Ezrin back. When Destroyer came out, there was an initial backlash that would ultimately be squashed by the song Beth being such a smash hit. But the initial reaction scared Kiss to run back to Eddie Kramer for their next couple of records. So they hadn't worked with Ezrin since Destroyer. Ezrin threw out the material they had been working on and ultimately suggested what the band needed was a concept album. And honestly, it's not a bad idea. Ezrin had already produced some all-time classic concept albums at that point, such as Pink Floyd's The Wall and Alice Cooper's Welcome to My Nightmare. And Kiss was a very theatrical band. It makes sense. Also, by this point, Gene was trying to break into Hollywood, and he had this story concept for a movie. Gene told Ezrin about the idea, and Ezrin loved it, deciding Kiss should make a concept album around this concept. Gene's pitch was about a group of beings older than dirt that watch over the earth and they select a champion. Said champion is a boy who goes on a hero's journey and becomes a man. That's it. That's about all the story they had. Gene was of course on board with this as it was his story idea and the album could basically be a pitch for the movie. For Paul, the opportunity provided a chance for the band to prove their harshest critics wrong, to show that they were serious artists and gain credibility at a point when they had none. Ace was completely against the idea, and Eric Carr didn't get a vote, so time for a concept album. Paul does tell a humorous story of Eric playing him tapes of early Metallica and thrash music during the making of the album, which I think shows where Eric's head was at during this time. Ace was so against the idea, he refused to go to Toronto for the recording sessions with the rest of the band. He recorded his guitar solos at his home studio and mailed them to Ezrin. All of this culminated in Music from the Elder, Kiss's masterpiece, or so they thought. They played it for the record company, who were horrified. By this point, Casablanca had been bought by Polygon, with Kiss signing a new lucrative deal thanks to the success of I Was Made for Lovin' You. The label made the choice to alter the track listing, putting The Oath first. But this was a concept album, and one with a weak story concept to begin with, and disrupting the narrative flow only made a bad situation worse. The Elder was released on November 10th, 1981, and it landed with a thud. It peaked at number 75 on the Billboard charts and sold so poorly, Kiss didn't even bother touring to promote it. The lead single, A World Without Heroes, peaked at number 56. Now, some Kiss fans might argue that there are albums that sold worse, which is true, but the context of those albums is different. 1997's Carnival of Souls probably sold less copies, but was also basically an afterthought with little to no promotion. Gene and Paul gave up on that album while they were recording it, and it had zero effect on their careers. Carnival of Souls is more just a fun trivia fact. Remember when Kiss tried to sound like Alice in Chains? The Elder has probably sold more copies than Sonic Boom or Monster, but Sonic Boom and Monster were released in a post-digital world, and both were top 5 albums. No, the biggest disaster in Kiss's recording career is The Elder. It was an ambitious move that they fully believed in, and it blew up in their faces hard. A lot of that was, of course, like I said, Kiss was on a downward trend. They had made a series of bad decisions that alienated their fanbase and killed their musical credibility. A dorky soundtrack for a non-existent fantasy movie was simply the final nail in the coffin and confirmation for a lot of people at the time that Kiss was over. I also personally just don't think the album works. There are songs I think work. I love A World Without Heroes, but as a concept album, I don't think it comes together. It's pretentious, and the story is paper-thin and uninteresting. And it not only doesn't showcase Kiss's strengths, but kinda highlights their weaknesses. However, Kiss would survive this. After another failed album, 1982's Creatures of the Night, Kiss decided to remove their makeup, which combined with the catchy single in Lick It Up, gave the band just enough publicity to pave a new way forward. Thanks for watching the first episode of this new series. I hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.